Silent love is a paradox, both absence and presence, both a longing and a refusal to name it. It is the tension between two hearts that recognize each other in a glance, but never cross the fragile threshold of confession. There are moments when you feel it more than you can explain, when someone's silence speaks in frequencies your reason can't decode. Maybe it's the way he remembers small, almost invisible things about you, the song you hum without realizing the way your hands tighten around a cup when you're anxious, the shift in your tone when you're tired but pretend to be fine. He never says it yet. You feel his attention circling you like an orbit, quiet but constant, and though he tries to appear unaffected, his eyes always betray him. In that gaze lives something unspoken, a truth restrained by fear. You begin to wonder whether what you perceive as indifference is actually something deeper, a kind of quiet captivity. Fear can build invisible walls around affection, and not all walls are made of stone. Some are made of memories of old wounds that taught a person that love is dangerous terrain. He may not realize it himself, but he's shaped by shadows from long ago disappointments that whisper, "Don't open up. It's safer this way." So he stays silent, not because he doesn't feel, but because he feels too much. His love has depth but no language, intensity but no form. Carl Jung once said that what is not made conscious returns as fate. And perhaps that is what's unfolding here, not a deliberate avoidance, but a repetition of something unresolved. He isn't avoiding you, he's fleeing from himself. This kind of love operates beneath awareness. It's not the bright, confident love sung about in songs, but something subterranean like an underground river, carving unseen paths. You can sense it in his gestures and the way his presence subtly shifts when you're near. His tone softens, his attention sharpens, and time seems to stretch between sentences. When you speak, he listens, not just hearing the words, but studying the emotional weather behind them. He recalls details you barely remember sharing, as though he's archiving fragments of you in a secret corner of his mind. Someone who doesn't feel wouldn't notice these things. Someone who doesn't care wouldn't remember. And yet his restraint is as revealing as his attention. He's careful, measured, as though every word he doesn't say carries the weight of something too sacred to risk. His silence becomes its own language, hesitant, trembling, full of what-ifs. You start to understand that silence can scream, that avoidance can be a form of protection, that distance doesn't always mean detachment. For some, love is a battlefield they never recovered from, and every new connection revives an old wound. For them, affection means vulnerability, and vulnerability feels like exposure. To open up is to risk being hurt again, and so they hide what could save them. Still, the unconscious has a way of revealing itself despite resistance. You notice it in the small, uncontrollable signs, how his laughter fades when another man's name appears in conversation, how his posture stiffens when he feels replaced, how his eyes linger a second too long before turning away. He'll say everything's fine, but his body disagrees. That faint flicker of jealousy, that discomfort he can't disguise, is the slip in the armor where truth leaks through. It's not possessiveness. It's fear, the fear of losing something he hasn't even allowed himself to claim. He's not competing for you. He's contending with the ghost of rejection, the specter that tells him he's not enough. There's something hauntingly beautiful about watching a man fight his own defenses. His silence is not emptiness, it's a struggle. Every gesture of care is a small rebellion against fear. He remembers what you love not because he's attentive, but because he's emotionally tethered to you. He texts at the exact moment you feel low, as if some invisible thread transmits your sadness to him. He appears when you need him most, not to fix things, but simply to stay. These aren't coincidences. They're expressions of love disguised as coincidence. When someone's affection runs deeper than words, it seeps into the ordinary. It becomes the coffee prepared just how you like it, the steady presence during your worst days, the quiet checking in when everyone else has gone silent. He may never call it love. He might even deny it to you, to himself, to the mirror. But love doesn't vanish because it's unnamed. It hides in gestures, in timing, in patterns of attention that no one else would notice. It's the constancy of showing up without obligation. It's the instinct to protect without promise. It's the way he listens not to reply, but to understand. In a world obsessed with loud declarations, There's something deeply human about a love that doesn't shout but whispers, that doesn't demand but endures. Sometimes you wonder what would happen if he allowed himself to speak. Would everything collapse or finally make sense? Would naming it destroy the magic or set it free? Perhaps he doesn't even know. Silent love often lives between two fears, the fear of losing and the fear of being seen. For him, love means walking through a battlefield unarmed, and silence is his last defense. But every defense is also a prison. So he waits, maybe unconsciously, for something or someone to make the silence safe enough to break. There's a strange kind of purity in what remains unspoken. When words are stripped away, what's left is essence, gesture, timing, presence, gaze. You start to notice how his affection unfolds, not in grand gestures, but in patterns of attention. Small acts that feel almost sacred in their consistency. When he senses you're tired, his tone softens instinctively. When you're distant, his energy shifts to match yours, quietly anchoring the atmosphere so you don't drift too far. He might never call to say he misses you, but somehow his name appears on your screen at the precise moment you need reassurance. These coincidences accumulate until you begin to realize they aren't coincidences at all. They're evidence of an invisible emotional rhythm that binds two people who have never dared to speak of it. Jung believed that what we repress doesn't disappear. It transforms, leaking into our choices, our gestures, our dreams. That's why his silence feels so alive. Every restrained impulse, every unfinished sentence, every glance that ends too quickly, they all carry a pulse, an undercurrent of desire, seeking a way to be acknowledged without being confessed. He doesn't have to say "I love you," because his entire being already says it in fragments, the way he remembers your favorite song, the way he shields you subtly from discomfort, the way he listens to your smallest concerns as if decoding a sacred text. To the untrained eye, these are nothing, but to the one who feels, they are everything. Still, the mind questions what the heart senses. You start wondering, is it real or am I imagining it? Is this care just kindness, or does it bloom from a deeper place he can't name? Because there is a difference, a tenderness in how he pays attention that cannot be faked. When someone truly sees you, not as a role but as a living soul, you feel it in the air. It's in the way he pauses before responding, as if weighing his words because they matter. It's in the quiet fascination of his gaze when you're lost in thought, unaware of being watched. These are not the acts of a man passing time. They are the rituals of someone emotionally invested beyond his own understanding. But love like this is heavy. It carries the weight of history. Somewhere in his past, affection may have turned into loss, vulnerability into pain. The psyche remembers. So now every time he feels that same intensity stirring within him, his defenses rise like ancient walls. He hides behind humor, practicality, intellectual distance. He builds safety and control. Because deep inside, he fears what might happen if he truly lets go, if he admits even to himself how deeply he feels. It's easier to be silent than to risk being known. Yet despite all his efforts to stay guarded, you can sense that every act of withdrawal is followed by return. He leaves emotionally, but he always comes back. That pendulum approach and retreat is the dance of the wounded lover. There are moments when the veil lifts, when for a heartbeat he forgets to defend himself. It might be a shared laugh that lingers too long, a conversation that drifts into honesty, a silence so complete it feels like communion. In those rare instants, something in him softens, a small surrender. His voice grows unguarded, his eyes steady and vulnerable, and you glimpse the man behind the armor. But then as quickly as it comes, it vanishes. He straightens his posture, changes the subject, masks the tremor in his voice with a smile. You can almost see the door close again. And you realize that this love is not linear but cyclical, like the moon waxing and waning, revealing and retreating forever, caught between light and shadow. Yet even in his retreat there's loyalty. He may not say much, but when your world begins to shake, he's the one who stays. He doesn't offer grand speeches or romantic declarations. He offers presence, the rarest form of love in a world full of noise. When you're quiet, he matches your silence instead of filling it. When you're broken, he doesn't try to fix you. He simply holds the space until your own strength returns. That's the paradox of silent love. It appears passive, but demands enormous strength. It's the kind of love that chooses steadiness over spectacle, substance over story. And still something inside you aches for clarity. You want to ask to name it, to make it real. But you sense that pressing him too soon might break the fragile bridge he's building within himself. Because this isn't only your story, it's also his inner journey. For him, love is not just an emotion, it's a psychological confrontation. To love you means to face his own fears, to reconcile the parts of himself he's buried. He is not just falling in love with you, he is fighting to become someone capable of love. You begin to understand that what's unfolding between you isn't merely a relationship, but a process of awakening his and perhaps your own. Silent love has a strange power. It turns the ordinary into revelation. A shared glance becomes a confession. An unspoken thought becomes a bridge. You start to see how every small exchange between you is charged with the weight of things unsaid, as though each interaction is a coded language the two of you are still learning to translate. You speak through pauses, through subtle inflections, through gestures so small no one else would notice. Yet to you they feel monumental, like the soul's secret syntax. There are days when you think he's finally ready to speak, when his defenses seem to falter, and his gaze lingers with something close to surrender. In those moments, the silence between you feels like it might crack open into honesty. But then, just as the words are about to form, something inside him retreats. Fear rushes back like a tide, reclaiming whatever vulnerability dared to surface. It's painful to witness this tug of war between desire and self-protection. He wants to love, but not to bleed. He wants to be close, but not to lose control. So he stays suspended between both half confession, half withdrawal, loving you in ways he can't even admit to himself. You begin to wonder what wound created this pattern. Perhaps once love arrived as betrayal, or affection was met with rejection so sharp it etched itself into his nervous system. Maybe he was taught that emotion is weakness, that sensitivity must be hidden to survive. Whatever the origin, it lingers a scar disguised as logic. And now that old pain has become a silent puppeteer guiding his actions. Jung called this the shadow, the part of ourselves we exile only to have it rule us from the dark. For him, the shadow is love itself, something beautiful he has come to fear. But even fear can't fully suppress what's true. His affection keeps leaking through the cracks, unstoppable in its quiet persistence. He shows it in the way he anticipates your needs, not because he's trying to impress, but because he's attuned. He adjusts small things around you. Temperature music, pace, as if creating an invisible harmony where you can rest. He defends you when others criticize, even subtly, without ever making it obvious. He shows a tenderness that's not loud, not performative, but constant. Love like this doesn't announce itself, it accumulates. It gathers weight through repetition until its silence becomes unmistakable. You notice something else too. He includes you in his future without realizing it. When he talks about dreams, plans, or even hypothetical scenarios, your presence slips into them unconsciously. You appear in his imagined cafe by the sea, in the cabin he hopes to build, in the life he sketches vaguely, but always with traces of you inside. He may never say us, but you are there, woven into his visions of peace. And that's no accident. We don't place people in our dreams unless our soul has already made space for them. This unconscious inclusion speaks louder than any formal declaration. It's not the planning that matters, but the fact that his mind naturally moves toward a shared horizon. Still, his resistance remains. Each time he edges closer, he seems startled by his own openness. Vulnerability for him feels like danger disguised as intimacy. You can almost see the moment fear takes hold, the tightening of the jaw, the forced shift to a safer topic. It's not about pride or indifference, it's about survival. His body remembers the sting of love gone wrong, the collapse that once followed exposure. And so even when he wants to let go, something primal pulls him back, whispering, "Protect yourself." You realize that silent love is not just his condition, it's a mirror of your own depths too. Because even as you long for clarity, some part of you understands him perfectly. You recognize the fragility of being seen. You know what it's like to feel too much and say too little. So you stay not because you enjoy the ambiguity, but because you sense that something real, something transformative is being born in this space of restraint. What you share with him is not just affection, it's evolution. The connection forces both of you to confront your own inner architecture, to see where fear ends and courage begins. There's beauty in that struggle, for even in his silence he is learning. Every time he listens to you without judgment, every time he softens instead of deflecting, every time he lets your presence dissolve a piece of his armor, he grows. Love, even unspoken, is alchemical. It changes both giver and receiver. What begins as silence may end as transformation. As two psyches slowly learning that safety doesn't require hiding, that connection doesn't have to mean loss. And perhaps that's why you can't walk away. Because somewhere beneath the silence, you can feel the truth moving slowly like spring thawing winter's ground. He may not have the words yet, but the feeling is alive, and feelings like that don't die easily. They wait, they evolve. They seek the moment when the heart finally decides that the risk of speaking is smaller than the pain of staying quiet. Sometimes you wonder whether the silence itself has become the relationship, an invisible thread stronger than any spoken bond. It's strange, but you begin to see that this kind of love lives between two acts of restraint, his for fear of losing control, and yours for fear of breaking the spell. Words might clarify, but they might also destroy what exists now. This delicate equilibrium where both of you understand more than you admit. So you stay inside the ambiguity, breathing its strange intimacy, feeling both nourished and starved by it at once. Because even without labels, without declarations, there's something undeniably real in the way he shows up when it matters. He never claims to be your savior yet. When the world feels too heavy, he appears. He doesn't promise forever yet. His presence feels like it's been there forever. You begin to notice that his care doesn't depend on convenience. It's not the kind that fades when life gets complicated. It's quiet, dependable, deeply rooted. When you cry, he doesn't rush to fix you. He just listens, the kind of listening that feels like being held. When you succeed, he celebrates without envy. When you falter, he stands close, but doesn't crowd you. That balance, the ability to be there without possession, is something rare, something that only someone who has suffered love's failures can master. He isn't perfect. His fear still drives him, and sometimes his distance wounds you more than silence ever could. But then he returns carrying small offerings of care, an unexpected message, a subtle question that reveals he's been paying attention all along. These small gestures carry more weight than grand speeches. They are the quiet proof of a feeling that refuses to die. You start to realize that for him, love isn't about words or gestures performed for the world. It's about endurance, about choosing to stay connected even when it's easier not to. And maybe in a way that's a form of courage. Because silent love isn't cowardice. It's often a kind of bravery misunderstood. It's the bravery of someone who has been shattered and still chooses to feel. The bravery of caring even when you can't explain why. To love in silence is to protect something fragile from the noise of expectation. It's to carry devotion like a secret flame, knowing that too much air might extinguish it. It's to wait for the soul to be ready before allowing the heart to speak. You begin to understand that his silence isn't a lack of love, it's love in exile waiting for permission to come home. But exile can't last forever. The soul demands expression. Even he begins to change in ways so subtle they're easy to miss. His laughter becomes lighter, his guard lower. He asks more questions about your world, not to control, but to belong. He begins to share small vulnerabilities, stories he once buried, fears he never voiced. At first, these confessions come wrapped in humor or deflection, but you hear the truth trembling underneath. Every admission, however small, is an act of trust. You see how much it costs him to speak honestly, and that realization humbles you. Because it's one thing to crave love from someone fluent in emotion, and another to receive it from someone who has had to fight his own ghosts to offer it. You notice that he studies you not with scrutiny, but with reverence. When you talk, his attention sharpens as though you are the only sound in the room. He listens not only to your words, but to the pauses between them, decoding your silences the way you decode his. This mutual understanding becomes its own language, one that needs no translation. There's something sacred in that two people who can hear what's unspoken, who can stand in stillness and still feel everything. It's not about dramatic romance. It's about recognition, the quiet certainty that you have found someone who sees you. And yet the paradox remains, love that deep can't stay hidden forever. The psyche resists suppression. What lives in the unconscious always seeks light. You can feel it building the quiet tension before confession. He may not yet have the words, but his behavior is already speaking them. He's less afraid of being seen, His gaze meets yours longer now, steady, almost defiant, as if daring the silence to end. And in that gaze lies everything: fear, longing, surrender. You realize then that love doesn't need an audience or approval. It only needs two souls brave enough to recognize each other beyond language. What binds you now isn't promise, but presence. He doesn't promise to stay, but he keeps showing up. He doesn't promise to love you, but he keeps doing it anyway. Every gesture, every quiet act of care is a declaration in disguise. And perhaps that's the secret Jung was pointing to when he said, "What is not made conscious returns as fate." Because what you resist in yourself eventually finds a way to live through your actions. And his actions, no matter how restrained, keep saying the same thing: "I love you, even if I can't say it." And then one day the silence between you begins to change. It no longer feels like a wall, it feels like a bridge. Something has softened in him, something you can't quite name but can feel in the air. The pauses are less guarded now, the laughter more spontaneous. He doesn't flee from closeness as quickly. The man who once lived inside his own restraint begins slowly to step beyond it. You can sense that he's starting to trust not only you, but also himself, to believe that love doesn't always end in loss, that vulnerability isn't the same as defeat. When he finally speaks, not in a confession, but in a sentence so ordinary it almost passes unnoticed, you realize the magnitude of what's happening. Maybe it's when he says, "I thought about you all day," or "It felt strange not hearing from you." Simple words, yet weighted with meaning. They aren't declarations, they're openings. Behind them lies everything he's been holding back: the fear, the longing, the unspoken years. His voice trembles slightly, as if unused to this kind of honesty. And in that tremor you hear what silence could never say: he's trying. Not perfectly, not fearlessly, but sincerely. You understand then that love doesn't always arrive as thunder. Sometimes it begins as a whisper, a man daring to speak what he's spent a lifetime burying. The beauty isn't in how loud the confession is, but in how much courage it took to make it at all. He may not use the words "I love you," but every syllable he utters now carries their echo. His gaze no longer turns away. It meets yours steady and unflinching. What was once hidden beneath layers of fear now stands exposed, fragile but alive. And yet even in this revelation, the silence doesn't vanish. It transforms. It becomes peaceful instead of painful. You no longer fear it because you understand it's no longer about avoidance, but about presence. When he sits beside you without speaking, you no longer wonder what he's thinking. You know. The quiet has become its own language, one fluent in trust. He's not performing love anymore. He's living it in the consistency of his care, the ease of his laughter, the stillness of his company. What began as repression has become rhythm. This transformation isn't dramatic. It's slow, human, imperfect, made of progress and relapse, courage and retreat. There are still days when he closes off, when fear returns like an old ghost. But now, instead of running, he stays. He admits he's scared. He lets you see the wound instead of hiding it. And that's the moment you realize love isn't about erasing fear, it's about walking through it together. For the first time, his silence feels like a shared space rather than a distance. The love that once hid in the shadows has found a form of light gentle enough to bear. You begin to reflect on what this journey has taught you, not just about him, but about love itself. That love doesn't always shout. That it doesn't always follow a script or conform to timelines. That sometimes love's greatest strength lies in its patience, its willingness to stay unspoken until the soul is ready. What you have lived is not a conventional love story, but a psychological pilgrimage, a descent into the unconscious, where affection and fear are twin forces shaping one another. And through this process, you've learned that understanding is a deeper language than confession. Perhaps this is what Jung meant by individuation, the becoming whole through the mirror of another soul. Because loving him has forced you to confront your own silences too, the parts of you that feared rejection, that doubted your worth, that stayed quiet to keep the peace. In loving a man afraid to speak, you learn to listen differently, to hear beneath words, to sense what the heart tries to hide. You discovered that real connection begins not when two people talk, but when two silences recognize each other. Now, when he looks at you, it no longer feels like a question. It feels like an answer. There's no need for explanation, no urgency for closure. The truth is already living between you in the way he reaches for your hand without thinking, in the way his laughter finds yours midair, in the way you both can sit together saying nothing, and feel full instead of empty. The love that was once silent has matured into something deeper than speech understanding. And maybe that's what love at its highest form really is, not a declaration, but an attunement. A shared frequency where both souls vibrate in quiet recognition. Love doesn't always need to be said aloud. Sometimes it only needs to be seen, lived, endured. Silent love isn't a tragedy, it's a transformation. It begins in fear, but ends in awareness. It teaches that even what is hidden has meaning, that what the unconscious conceals the heart can still reveal. So when you think back on this journey, you no longer see it as waiting for him to speak. You see it as both of you learning a new language, the language of patience, of empathy, of trust, built in silence. And in that realization, something inside you settles, because now you know love doesn't need permission to exist. It just does. If these words resonated with you, if they reminded you of someone you once loved in silence or still do, give this video a like. Share it with someone who understands the quiet between two souls, and subscribe to join more reflections like this. Let's keep exploring the spaces where words end and truth begins.